something that I find to be increasingly frustrating is a leaking faucet. Because it's not a problem that warrants immediate repair. So what's a permanent or close solution that you can have? Just simply putting a bucket underneath it. And that's something you can deal with for another day. But then you realize when you come home from work later that day, that bucket is almost 3/4 of the way full. But because there's still room left in that bucket, you think, that's a problem for another day. I find this to be analogous to the carbon budget within our climate system. Because while we still have time to act on the worst effects of climate change, that time is slowly slipping from us. That's because approximately every year, human beings emit about 50 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year. That's about 150 times as heavy as the Great Pyramid of Giza. And according to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, if we want to stay within the changes of CO2 and 2 degrees Celsius CO2 scenario, we have roughly 2,900 gigatons of carbon within our budget. And already we have spent more than 1,800 gigatons of CO2. So that means we only have a little bit over 1,000 gigatons of CO2 remaining, or 35%. 35% left in this scenario. So that means if future trends in fossil fuel production and consumption are correct, we only have a 20-year of supply left. Just 20 years to radically change our society. And moving back to the leaking faucet analogy, the best way to fix this problem would be to simply stop the leak altogether. But in order to do that, that's going to require hugely radical systematic changes in our society. And honestly, I don't think we're prepared for that yet. But the best thing that we can do right now is to maximize the space that's left within that bucket. And this is increasingly important because only 100 companies are responsible for more than 71% of global industrial greenhouse gas emissions around the world. So it is more important than ever that corporations are committing to strong climate action. But how do they do that? It's a daunting task, and many companies, specifically those in the food and beverage sector, have massive supply chains with suppliers all over the world. So this quandary led me to ask the question, how can food retailers decrease emissions while increasing profits? Now this is the type of question that the Science Based Targets Initiative is trying to answer. For my summer internship, I headquartered in the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C. WRI is one of the founding members of the Science Based Targets Initiative, alongside the Carbon Disclosure Project, the UN Global Compact, and the World Wildlife Fund. The initiative is committing to creating methodologies and tools that work for all types of corporations and many different sectors. Basically, these are tools to help companies set targets based on their production intensity, their revenue, size, many different factors. So I'd like to show you exactly what a climate commitment, ambitious climate commitment looks like. So utilizing the CDP corporate database, I analyzed hundreds of different companies and their goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. These are 6 companies that have been approved by the initiative, and I'd like to highlight one for you right now. Mars Inc., the makers of M&Ms and other delicious candy, commits to reducing scopes 1 through 3 emissions 67% by 2050 from a 2015 base year. So you might think, how do I understand if this is ambitious or not? In order for you to understand if this is ambitious, you need to know exactly what scopes are. Scopes 1, 2, and 3 are essentially all the different categories of emissions that a company has control over. Think cars, electric grid, or leased assets. And speaking of leased assets and supply chains, the final outcome of my internship was mapping where carbon takes place within a supply chain. I focused on companies that produce chicken products. You know, the chicken that you get at a grocery store. The different colors reflect the categories within Scope 3, basically categories 1 through 15 within Scope 3 emissions. And the different shapes indicate whether this is a venture or a part of the supply chain that the company either fully owns or is owned by a third party. It is critical to map where carbon takes place within a supply chain so companies can visually see where they can make the cuts necessary. And without my professional science master's program, I would not have been able to complete my internship at WRI. Because the skills I learned, everything from greenhouse gas accounting, climate science policy, and sector-based modeling, has allowed me to see where those critical points of intervention lie within economic productivity and greenhouse gas emissions. So I hope to use these skills and these experiences to fulfill a dream of a world, economy, and society that works for people and for the environment. And for once and for all, to fix that leaking faucet. Thank you very much.